Ah, my hair's a bit messed up. Alright. This is Alice Down the Plughole, chapter 3. Verse 2, chapter 3. The King's Cricket Club. The Jack of Spades played with his long, silky, black curled hair and gazed lovingly at his own reflection in a gold hand mirror, which he had been doing throughout the entire trial. He was dashingly handsome, fine, strong jaw, charming smile, and beautiful pearly white teeth. Yeah. He wore a neatly trimmed, pointy black goatee beard and a twisted, waxed, pencil-thin moustache under his perfect upturned nose. Although his nose wasn't really upside down, of course. That would look very stupid indeed, especially on such an otherwise perfectly fine chiselled face. In fact, his hooter was a very fine, straight pink nose indeed. Anyway, he had been far too busy preening himself and spraying perfumed scents behind his small rounded ears to take any notice whatsoever of what was happening in the courtroom. In fact, it was several hours before he noticed that the trial was over and everybody else had gone home. He was a queer fellow, and so totally, completely, and absolutely in love with himself to worry about anybody else. As far as the Jack of Spades was concerned, he was the centre of the universe, only looking up from his mirror every once in a while to stare lovingly at the smooth round buttocks of his pretty servant boys. The truth is that it was not until he raised his right hand to ask permission to take a pee that he realised the room was empty. Alice really wasn't sure what time it was at all, as so far she had not seen any clocks in Down Underland. But the golden sun was shining brightly in the clear blue sky, and she was getting very hot indeed. So Alice guessed that it must be some time in the middle of the afternoon. She took off her grey school blazer, folded it neatly, and tucked it under her chair. Alice was now sitting on the palace lawn, at a wooden table, with the King of Clubs, the Queen of Hearts, and the Duchess of Diamonds, drinking an ice-cold glass of golden lager. "Shall we play a game of chess?" asked the Duchess. "Chess is no fun at all for a king," protested His Royal Majesty. "It may be fun for the queens, for they can move in any direction that they desire, but I can only move one square at a time, which gets very boring after a while and really is not very fair at all. We don't have enough kings and queens at the party to play a game of chess anyway," commented the Queen of Hearts. "Where is the Queen of Clubs?" asked Alice. "Pissed off her face as usual, young lady." The King of Clubs snorted through his rather large red nose. "She is playing bingo with the dingoes today," he explained. "Well, I could pretend to be the King of Hearts on the red side, and Jack of Spades can play the Queen on the black team," suggested the Duchess of Diamonds. "I'm pretty sure that he is the Queen already," laughed the King of Clubs. "Anyway, We can't play chess today because all the knights are still in hospital. Their horses keep tripping over their own feet, and seem totally unable to walk in a straight line, always zigzagging over the board like drunken Irishmen. Is it any wonder that those gallant soldiers keep falling off their saddles? That is probably because they are usually drunk, sighed the Queen of Hearts. How about a nice game of croquet, suggested the fat monarch. She was wearing a scarlet red satin evening dress and a ruby-encrusted golden crown. Atop her bunched up silver grey hair. We don't have any pink flamingos or hedgehogs for that matter, replied the king. And to be brutally honest, I really am getting very bored with croquet. The Duchess of Diamonds stands up and hands a small piece of cloth to the Queen of Hearts. My sampler, Your Majesty, she explains. I was up all night stitching it for you. She seemed very proud of herself. Sampler? Shouted the Queen of Hearts. I think they have been stitched up, my dear woman. I said croquet today, not crochet. Actually, I think it is spelt trocket. Crochet is actually spelt trocket. Trocket. The actual correct spelling of croquet is trocket. But I think crochet looks better. Are you going deaf as well as senile in your old age? Giggled the Queen. The King of Clubs stands up and rests his hands on his wide hips. He's a rather tubby, rosy-cheeked fellow with a loud, booming voice. Let's play a game of cricket. Alice looked around the garden at the king's servants, who were busy preparing the evening feast for the banquet. Have all your servants just returned from fighting in a war? She asked. They do look rather battered and bruised. Most of the servants had black eyes or broken noses. 3 of them were hopping around on crutches with broken legs, and several of them had an arm emplaster and wore a sling around the shoulder. Oh, there hasn't been a war in Down Under Land for several years, the king yawned. Then how did your servants get hurt so badly? Asked Alice. Duchess of Diamonds shrugged her skinny shoulders. Well, they don't call him the King of Clubs for nothing, The Jack of Spades had only just arrived at the royal garden party and was now busy digging up the shrubbery and planting black rose bushes with a shovel. Alice walked over to Bruce the gardener, who was chatting to a tall, skinny man wearing a white tuxedo and holding a silver tray full of flute glasses of pink champagne. I thought you were the head gardener here, she asked. Why is the Jack of Spades planting roses? Isn't that your job? The old man chuckled. Oh, these days I mainly now mow the palace lawns and trim the king's hedges, Bruce explained. Nowadays the royal families like to tend their own rose bushes. Ever since that fiasco in Wonderland, when the Queen of Hearts gardeners planted white roses by accident and then tried painting them red. I remember, smiled Alice. I was there at the time. If I remember correctly, I think they were all beheaded that very same evening. Bruce turned towards the tall, skinny man dressed in a white tuxedo. Alice, I would like you to meet Mr. Tweedle, the Queen of Hearts' butler. I am very pleased to make your acquaintance, sir. Would you care for a glass of champagne? Asked Tweedle-Paa. No, thank you, replied Alice. It is a little bit too bubbly for me, and to be honest, it tastes like fizzy cat's piss. A short, fat woman wearing a white chef's uniform walks over to her husband. She curtsied a low bow before the teenage girl. This is my dear wife, Tweedle-Ma, the Queen of Hearts head cook. Mr. Tweedle put his white hand around the plump woman's waist and kissed her on the cheek. I have met your twin sons, Tweedledee and Tweedledum. Alice smiles. I suppose you travelled here with the Queen, she guessed. Mrs. Tweedle handed a plate of triangular cucumber sandwiches to the teenage schoolgirl. The whole family came. We are on a kind of a working holiday. Yes, a working holiday, agreed Mr. Tweedle. The Queen has a holiday, and we do all the work. I want a game of cricket, shouts the King of Clubs. Now standing on a chair in the palace garden and jumping up and down impatiently. The legs of the wooden chair snap under the weight of the fat man, and he tumbles painfully to the ground. The king stands up and rubs his bruised backside. Okay. What did you want to ask? Sorry. I just thought you had a question for me. No? All right. Hold on. Telepathy. Bloody awful disease, isn't it? I want to give him a cricket, shouts the King of Clubs, now standing on a chair in the palace garden and jumping up and down impatiently. The legs of the wooden chair snap under the weight of the fat man, and he tumbles painfully to the ground. The king stands up and rubs his bruised backside. Do you have a cricket bat? Asked the Duchess of Diamonds. She's a skinny, pale-faced woman, but instead of a crown, she wears a small silver tiara on her head. And she was indeed only a duchess, and not quite regal enough to be a royal queen. The King of Clubs picked up his golden crown, which had fallen off when he tumbled off his chair, and scratched his balding head. We have plenty of bats in the caves beneath the royal palace, he replied. We have fruit bats, pygmy bats, which are obviously too small to play cricket with, spotted winged bats, hammer-headed bats, which are very useful. I often use one of them to thump the servants if there isn't a big enough club to hand. Small-toothed bats, rounded bats, blossom bats, rosette bats, although I really am not quite sure what that word means. Perhaps its wings look like roses or something, pondered His Majesty. Striped-faced bats, long-tailed and black-bellied bats, silver bats, large-eared bats, which I suppose would have very good hearing, butterfly bats, woolly bats, trumpet-eared bats, which must have absolutely excellent hearing, probably even better than the large-eared bat. The king paused. Have you ever heard the phrase, as blind as a bat? Well, if bats are so blind, then how can they see so clearly in the dark? So the king continued his list. We have red bats, brown bats, tarcuna bats, desert bats, yellow bats, hairy bats, mouse-tailed bats, dog-faced bats, and wrinkled-lipped bats. We even have a few vampire bats. You are making these names up now, Alice interrupted, which is probably just as well, because most of the guests at the royal garden party were beginning to doze off, and two of the servants were fast asleep on the soft green lawn. The Queen of Hearts kicked one of them in the stomach. Off with your head, she shouted. The servant stood up and ran across the lawn, just as fast as he possibly could. He tripped over his own feet and fell head first into the large ornate garden pond. The King of Clubs put his right hand into a pocket of his black velvet robes and took out a small book. He handed it to Alice as she read the cover. The I Spy a Bat Handbook. She paused and curtsied towards the king. "I do apologise, Your Majesty." The monarch scratched his bearded chin. "I don't think there are any cricket bats in the caves," he frowned. "I think he has a few bats in his belfry," whispered the Duchess of Diamonds in Alice's right ear. She smiled at the king. "Bats would probably be too small anyway," she commented. "And they would probably fly away anyhow." "You should buy some flamingos," suggested the Queen of Hearts, eating a slice of an orange sponge cake. That would taste delicious, wouldn't it? Orange sponge cake. I've never had orange sponge cake. I'd like to try orange sponge cake. You should buy some flamingos, suggested the Queen of Hearts, eating a slice of orange sponge cake. It was now dusk, and the tired evening sun was setting over the golden purple horizon. The Jack of Spades had now finished planting black rose bushes. He handed his rusty black iron shovel to the King of Clubs. "You can use my spade for a cricket bat," suggested the young handsome prince. He was wearing a rather elegant, elaborately embroidered black velvet, high-collared jacket with scarlet stitching and silver decorations, blue and red checkered silk tights, and a red feathered black leather tricorn hat. Alice couldn't help thinking how dashingly handsome the young charming prince looked. The prince turned his head towards the pretty pink-haired teenage girl in a grey school uniform and winked his right eye. Alice blushed a deep scarlet red, flushing her rosy cheeks. He was holding a single velvet-petaled black rose. The Jack of Spades stepped closer until his nose was tip to tip with Alice's nose. The young woman giggled nervously. She had never been kissed before. Well, apart from by her mother and father and various aunts and uncles, and by her close girlfriends at school. But she had never been kissed by a boy, and certainly not by a handsome, charming man like Prince Jack. His Royal Highness leans over the teenage girl's left shoulder, his pencil-thin moustache tickling her soft, rosy cheek. "He smells so beautifully sweet," thought Alice to herself. The prince hands the black rose to Bruce, the head gardener, who was standing behind the pretty schoolgirl. "Sorry about that," he apologised to Alice. The King of Clubs hit one of his servants over the head with the rusty black shovel, and the Seven of Clubs fell unconscious to the ground. "This will do just fine for the bat. Now all we need are a ball and a pair of cricket stumps." "Let's use a tomato from the vegetable patch," suggested the Duchess of Diamonds. The king points his finger at a black and white feathered ostrich standing in the garden compost heap. "Look," he shouted, "we can use his long thin legs as the stumps." On hearing this, the large bird buried its bald head in a mound of stinking, rotting vegetables and, overwhelmed by the stench of the putrid waste, fainted. The two of spades and the five of clubs pulled the ostrich out of the compost heap and dragged the huge bird back to the garden lawn. "I am the first to bat," proclaimed the King of Clubs. "It is my party after all." The ostrich stood behind the king, looking rather dazed and confused. "Won't he fly away?" asked Alice, holding a large ripe red tomato. "Ostriches can't fly," shouted the king. He was standing at the other end of the garden lawn. "What use are a bird's wings if he cannot fly in the sky?" asked Alice. His Majesty shrugged his broad shoulders. "That is a question you will have to save for the Creator." The Queen of Hearts stood behind the ostrich, for if the ball hit the stumps, which in this case would be the bird's legs, then the ostrich would fall back safely into Her Majesty's arms. She had always been an animal lover, or so she would have you believe, although I really don't think she was very kind to her flamingos. Alice ran towards the King of Clubs, swinging the large red tomato over her head. The old man swung the shovel, and the tomato landed with a splat in the Queen of Hearts' face. "Off with her head!" she yelled. "I am ever so sorry, Your Majesty," apologised the frightened schoolgirl, "but it was an accident." "Do you have any hedgehogs?" sighed the Queen, wiping the red sticky goo off her face with a white silk handkerchief. "I'm afraid not," sighed the King of Clubs, "but there are plenty of possums in the trees of the royal orchard." The Seven of Clubs hands a small furry black possum to the King. "My turn to bowl," His Majesty commanded. He handed the black shovel to Alice, who was now standing in front of the ostrich, who was shivering with fear and knocking its knees together. "Stop that," whispered Alice. "You're supposed to be the stumps." "If you hit the ball hard enough, you can win a tin of biscuits," suggested the old king. "And if somebody catches the ball, you have to give them back." The small black possum was curled up tightly in the king's right hand. Mrs. Tweedle, the Queen of Hearts' head cook, handed a dented tin of biscuits to Alice. She curtsied to the King of Clubs and kissed the Queen of Hearts on her right hand. "Thank you very much for the biscuits, Your Majesty. I have certainly had a wonderful time," Alice yawned. It was dark now, and the silver moon shone brightly overhead, and glittering stars twinkled in the dark blue velvet night sky. "I should like to take a stroll around the royal garden before bedtime, if that is at all possible," she asked politely. The Queen of Hearts tapped Alice on the left shoulder. "What do you know about royalty?" she asked.